Let's discuss Queen Camilla and her evolution from a controversial figure to the reigning consort, examining her impact on Charles. How has the king changed compared to how he was decades ago? Buckingham Palace was designed to hide secrets, yet today those barriers fail to contain recent revelations. Queen Camilla has been implicated in activities so unheard of that King Charles faces a dilemma between his wife and his crown. Sir Clive Alderton, the king's chief aide, hadn't found rest in 3 full days. The findings he stumbled upon 72 hours prior had occupied his every thought as he double-checked facts that felt impossible to accept. However, the documentation was irrefutable, found in files that Camilla herself had carelessly allowed to remain trackable. It started with a standard review of royal spending, a task usually done every quarter without any fanfare. A young accountant flagged odd discrepancies regarding payments signed off by the Queen Consort's staff. While the sums weren't large enough to indicate theft, the recipients were certainly strange. Funds were sent to consulting groups with no clear link to official royal obligations. Money moved to media production firms that were not on the approved vendor list for the palace. Sir Clive personally took over the inquiry right away. What he revealed over the next few days sketched a portrait of organized deceit. Camilla had built what was effectively a covert operation, paid for by her budget, but functioning completely without the king's knowledge. She had employed strategists, PR experts, and legal minds working on initiatives that went against standing palace rules. The most shocking find occurred when Sir Clive opened encrypted emails that Camilla believed were safe. She had been in talks with a major U.S. streaming giant regarding a documentary series intended to tell her side of the story. The show was planned for release after Charles's death, but the work was being done now in secret, while she remained queen consort. There was even more to uncover because Camilla had been holding meetings with constitutional attorneys to investigate the legal boundaries of her position. The queries she posed to these legal experts were incredibly disturbing. Could a queen consort keep her rank after a legal separation? What would her financial standing look like if the marriage dissolved? She asked what rights she possessed to share her narrative if the palace tried to silence her, which were not merely idle thoughts. These were inquiries made by a person getting ready for a future break. Sir Clive realized instantly that this data could not be managed through standard procedures. This was not an issue for committee debate or slow movement through bureaucratic levels. It demanded immediate intervention from the king himself. The violation of faith was too deep, the possible fallout too grave, and the questions regarding the monarchy's stability too pressing to wait. He set up a private session with Charles, asking for it to happen at once and that nobody else be tipped off beforehand. When he presented his findings, showing file after file, the king's response went through distinct phases. First was denial, a total inability to believe that Camilla was capable of such behavior. Then came a precise review of the proof, searching for other reasons or misunderstandings. Eventually, a profound silence fell, the sort that occupies a space when a person understands their reality has shifted forever. Charles posed just one query before arriving at his conclusion. He asked how many individuals were aware of this situation. Sir Clive promised him that the circle of trust remained tiny, including only himself and the young auditor who found the initial error. Charles replied that they must gather immediately. He ordered Sir Clive to summon everyone who needed to be present when they faced this issue. The crisis gathering was scheduled for the next morning, leaving the king with only one sleepless night to handle the personal and legal nightmare waiting behind closed doors. The extent of Camilla's covert projects became more obvious as investigators looked further into the digital and paper tracks she left. What came to light was not the action of someone acting on a whim or making rare mistakes. This was a meticulously designed, intentionally concealed parallel organization that had been running for at least 18 months. At the core of Camilla's operations was a tiny team of counselors who worked completely outside the formal palace structure. These people were chosen for their skills and silence, including an ex-newspaper editor with deep tabloid ties. There was also a public relations pro who had previously managed celebrities dealing with reputation disasters. A literary agent famous for getting huge book deals for scandalous memoirs was also involved. Together, this off-the-book squad had been building what they privately dubbed Project Narrative. The objective was simple yet volatile because they wanted to guarantee that Camilla's version of history regarding her decades with Charles would finally be shared on her own terms. She wanted to speak in her own voice through channels she owned rather than through the lens of palace PR. The documentary discussions with the streaming service were the furthest along part of Project Narrative. Draft contracts had been written up, although they remained unsigned. The show was designed as a historical look back, exploring the monarchy's growth through Camilla's perspective. It intended to cover her youth, her first marriage, and her bond with Charles while he was wed to Diana. It would also detail the years she spent as Britain's most hated woman and her eventual path to acceptance as queen consort. The producers had pitched the project as sympathetic instead of sensational, arguing it would humanize Camilla and secure her legacy. However, the palace press team immediately saw the threat when they finally found out about it. Any show like that, regardless of how gently made, would unavoidably bring up painful chapters that the monarchy had tried for years to leave behind. It would turn Diana's memory into a main character in a fresh drama, reopening injuries that the British public had never fully healed from. Aside from the documentary, Camilla had also been quietly ordering research that looked a lot like political intelligence work. She had paid experts to run polls on public feelings about the monarchy. They specifically checked if the British public would back a queen consort who kept her rank even if she split from the king. The findings of this survey, while held in confidence, hinted that Camilla felt her personal favorability had risen enough for her to survive without the shield of her marriage to Charles. Even more worrying were the legal meetings where Camilla had sat down numerous times with lawyers who focused on constitutional rules. She had posed specific queries about past cases involving other royal spouses who had divorced or separated. She also asked about financial payouts and property ownership rights. She had asked if there was any way a queen consort could keep ceremonial roles while living apart from the monarch. Money matters were another sector where Camilla had been getting ready for possible independence. She had been silently moving assets that were technically her own rather than crown property. She had set up trust funds for her children from her first marriage, guaranteeing they would be safe no matter what happened to her status in the royal family. She had even bought a country home in her own name through a complex chain of transactions to serve as a private retreat outside palace oversight. The image created by all this movement was of a woman who, while publicly acting as a loyal consort, was privately planning for several different outcomes. Maybe she truly feared Charles might die before her and wanted to make sure she remained safe afterward. Perhaps she worried that their union, which had outlasted so much public judgment, might not withstand the stresses of the throne. Or perhaps, most alarmingly, she was actively thinking about a future where she chose to leave, trading her title for the liberty to manage her own story. What made this especially heartbreaking was the element of secrecy. If Camilla had approached Charles with worries about her long-term safety, he certainly would have collaborated with her to fix them. If she had shown interest in finally sharing her memoir, a discussion could have happened regarding timing and rules. However, by working in the dark and constructing a whole system without his awareness, she had fractured something essential in their bond. To comprehend why Camilla's moves meant more than just marital trouble, one must understand the unique legal standing of a queen consort in the British system. Unlike the ruler whose job is strictly defined by centuries of law, the consort's place exists in a grayer area. The consort holds no constitutional authority and no official tasks required by law, yet carries huge symbolic importance. They are expected to represent specific values that bolster the monarch and the crown. The crisis Camilla started hit at the core of how the monarchy operates in the modern era. The institution lasts partly through mystery, careful control of public views, and the look of unity. When a top royal starts acting alone and chasing their own goals, that carefully built facade begins to break. Once it fractures, history proves that public trust can fade with shocking speed. Lord Ashford, a top constitutional expert called to the urgent meeting, argued this point strongly. He reminded the group that the monarchy is not a standard family, despite recent attempts to look more relatable. It is an organization stitched into the very cloth of British government. The sovereign is not merely the head of state, but the supreme governor of the Church of England and the head of the armed forces. When the monarch's nearest partner weakens that role through secret plotting, it causes waves that go far past personal ties. The specific legal worries were plentiful, starting with the issue of reliance. The ruler must be able to depend completely on their consort's silence. State issues are debated between them, and the king's vulnerabilities are laid bare in their private time. If Camilla was ready to conceal major money and work deals from Charles, what else might she hide or expose? Could secret data be in danger if she were getting ready to pen a book or do interviews? Second, there was the matter of setting a precedent. If Camilla could build independent structures and prep for a life outside the marriage while serving as queen consort, what signal did that send to others? Would Princess Catherine feel she had a right to similar freedom? Would other royal partners decide they could chase personal gigs without asking for permission through correct channels? The system that had ruled royal conduct for ages could fall apart if these lines were not held. Third, and maybe most critical, was the chance for a public scandal. The British tabloids remained hungry for royal drama despite decades of trying to fix the press culture. If word of Camilla's hidden moves got out, the reporting would be non-stop and cruel. Every part of her bond with Charles would be reanalyzed, and old scars regarding Diana would be ripped open. Questions about whether Charles was fit to rule would return with fresh energy. The Commonwealth factor added another level of difficulty. King Charles serves not only as the British ruler, but as the head of the Commonwealth, leading 56 nations. Many of these countries have complex ties to the monarchy, seeing it as a remnant of colonialism that they put up with rather than love. A scandal with the queen consort, especially one hinting at instability or lies, could speed up efforts in some realms to cut ties completely. Jamaica, Australia, and several Caribbean states were already having active debates about becoming republics. This crisis could tip the scales in those arguments. Dame Patricia Whitmore, the palace's top lawyer, brought up another worrying issue. If Camilla had been working on contracts without proper disclosure, the crown could face legal trouble. Using household money for unapproved aims might not be a crime, but it violated the rules set by Parliament for those funds. An official probe could be requested, forcing the palace to reveal internal details in ways that would be deeply humiliating. The advisors argued over various legal and constitutional fixes. Could Camilla be stripped of her rank while staying married to the king? The answer was unclear, because the title of queen consort comes from her marriage to the sovereign, not from a standalone gift. As long as she was wed to Charles and he remained king, she was legally the queen consort whether she did any work or lived in a palace or not. Taking her title away would basically require ending the marriage, which brought its own huge problems. Could her actions be limited through some kind of court order or palace rule? Maybe, but enforcing it would be tough and might cause the exact public fight everyone wanted to skip. The visual of the king legally restricting his own wife would be a massive PR disaster. It became clear through hours of talk that there was no tidy constitutional answer. The crisis lived in the gap between law and custom, between written statutes and unwritten hopes. It would have to be solved through talks, rebuilding trust, or admitting the marriage might not survive this breach. The Constitution offered no simple solutions because it had never imagined a situation quite like this. Behind the legal terms and analysis lay a simpler and sadder reality where a husband felt deceived by his wife. King Charles sat in the crisis meeting, surrounded by staff and kin, yet he was deeply alone. The burden of the crown stopped him from reacting like a private citizen. He could not just storm out or let his anger show too plainly. He could not make choices based only on his personal emotions. Yet those feelings were clearly there, seen in his clenched jaw and tired eyes. Charles and Camilla's relationship had always been complex, with a history tied to the modern monarchy itself. They first met in the early 70s. They were two young people pulled together with an energy friends described as electric. But royal duty got in the way because Charles was expected to wed someone with no past who could be shaped into a future queen. Camilla didn't fit that mold, so she married another man while Charles eventually wed Diana Spencer. The years that followed were full of misery for everyone. Charles's union with Diana was rocky almost from the beginning, though it gave them two loved sons. His bond with Camilla started up again during his marriage, which caused one of the biggest scandals in royal history when it came out. Diana's famous interview mentioning three people in the marriage-focused public rage on Camilla. She became the villain in a story the public saw as a ruined fairy tale. After Diana died in '97, Charles faced a long battle to fix both his image and Camilla's. It took years before they could be seen in public together, and even longer before their wedding in 2005 was accepted by a doubtful public. It took until Queen Elizabeth's passing in 2022 for Camilla to finally be recognized as queen consort instead of a lesser rank. Throughout all this, the story Charles promoted was one of true love beating the odds. The idea was that they were soulmates, kept apart by old rules, but who finally found their way to a happy ending. This story was vital for winning public support because it changed their tale from one of cheating into one of romance. Now, sitting in that meeting, Charles had to face the chance that this love story stood on shaky ground. The woman he fought to make his queen had been secretly prepping for a future without him. She was talking to lawyers about splitting up and making media deals that would make him look bad. She was also building financial freedom that hinted she didn't plan to rely on him forever. Several people at the meeting later described a moment when Charles nearly lost his cool. It happened when Sir Clive showed the polling data asking if the public would accept a queen consort who left the king. The meaning was harsh. Camilla had been testing if she could make it without him and if her popularity was high enough to stand alone. For a man who gave up so much to be with her, the betrayal cut deep. Yet Charles also had to think about his own part in causing this mess. Had he been so busy being king that he ignored his wife? Had the shift from prince to sovereign changed their bond in ways he missed? Camilla had apparently been struggling with her role, feeling trapped or sad. Instead of talking to him, she sought outside advice and made exit plans. What did that say about their communication or her trust in him? Prince William, watching his father, was reminded of his own parents' failed marriage. He was old enough to recall the fights and the separate lives his parents lived. He remembered the public breakdown that hurt him and his brother Harry. Now, watching Charles deal with a possible marital collapse while trying to save the crown, William saw history repeating itself. The pattern of unhappy royal marriages seemed to reach even his father's second chance at love. The personal side of the crisis couldn't be split from the institutional one. Charles had to decide as a king, but he also had to live with the choice as a man. If he cracked down on Camilla to limit her moves, he would protect the crown but ruin his personal happiness. If he chose to be soft and seek peace, he might save his marriage, but look weak as a leader. As the meeting went on, Charles made a choice that showed his character. He would not make final calls on punishment until he spoke with Camilla directly. He needed to hear from her own lips what drove her to this. He needed to know if she still wanted the marriage or if she was trying to escape. Only then could he decide how to move forward as both king and husband. The meeting paused until that talk could happen. The emergency gathering had been called by the king, but it quickly showed that different groups in the palace had different views. A power struggle followed, revealing the complex web of interests inside the royal household. All of this was hidden by a mask of unity, but Prince William represented what could be called the modern group. His view was that the monarchy needed to adapt to current values to survive. He argued that Camilla's wish for independence wasn't the real threat. The mistake, he suggested, was the secrecy rather than the ambition itself. He proposed making formal rules that would allow senior royals more space for personal projects while keeping oversight. This stance was backed by younger advisors, especially those in digital strategy. They noted that the old model of voiceless royals was failing in the age of social media. Meghan and Harry had rejected that model and left. If the monarchy wanted to keep people, it needed to give them room to breathe. Princess Anne stood for the opposite side, which was the traditionalist view. Her argument was firm and unyielding, that those who take the perks of royal life must accept the limits. There is no middle ground where one is partly in and partly out. Camilla enjoyed the status and money that came with being queen consort. In exchange, she was expected to put the institution's needs above her own desires. By trying to be independent while keeping her job, she broke the deal that made the system work. Anne's view had strong support among older officials and church representatives. They worried that giving in to personal freedom would start a slide that would ruin the monarchy's special status. If royals were just celebrities chasing their own brands, why should taxpayers fund them? A third group, led by long-serving aides, focused on damage control. They cared less about philosophy and more about fixing the immediate mess. How could this be contained to stop a scandal? Their instinct was to compromise and find a quiet fix, believing that fighting was the biggest danger. The debate got heated, though it stayed polite. William and Anne argued over whether history or practicality should guide them. William noted that old ways hadn't stopped marriages from failing or scandals from blowing up. Clearly, the traditional methods weren't working. Anne countered that ditching principles due to pressure would only cause more chaos. Dame Patricia tried to find a middle path by outlining ideas for reform. Maybe there could be a formal way for royals to pitch projects to a committee. Perhaps money rules could be cleared up so individuals had their own funds, reducing the need for secrets. Maybe there could be safe categories of activity that didn't need approval. But these ideas for system change hit a major wall, which was King Charles himself. This crisis wasn't abstract for him, it was personal and painful. He wasn't ready to start a huge restructure when he just needed to handle his wife's betrayal. He wanted a solution, not a reorganization. He wanted to know if his marriage could be saved, not if the monarchy could be fixed. Sir Clive sensed the meeting was drifting and brought everyone back to the urgent choices. Ignoring the long-term questions, there were urgent things to decide. Should Camilla's talks with the streaming site be stopped? The answer was a unanimous yes. Should her informal team be fired? Again, everyone agreed. Should there be money penalties? Here, people disagreed, with some wanting punishment and others saying it would backfire. The question of telling the public was the most divisive. William argued strongly against saying anything unless the story leaked. He believed that admitting problems would only invite unwanted attention. Anne disagreed, suggesting a careful statement might stop worse rumors if leaks happened. Prince Edward, who had been quiet, offered a thought that changed the room. He noted that everyone assumed Camilla would accept their rules. But what if she refused? What if she decided the cost of staying was too high and chose to leave? In other words, what if the palace had less leverage than they thought? The question hung in the air because it revealed an uncomfortable truth. They couldn't actually force Camilla to stay. They could only make her position hard, which might push her toward the exit she was already looking at. As evening came, it was clear no agreement would be reached. There were too many competing views and too much emotion clouding the strategy. King Charles finally stated he would decide after talking to Camilla. In the meantime, immediate steps would be taken to stop her unauthorized work. The meeting ended without a final answer, leaving everyone unsure of what would happen next. In the weeks after the meeting, a strange calm fell over the palace. On the outside, nothing seemed different. The king and queen consort kept appearing together at public events. They smiled and did their jobs with professional skill. But those who knew the truth saw subtle changes. Camilla's independent team was quietly gone. Her schedule was now managed closely by the king's office. The documentary was killed before contracts were signed, reportedly at a high cost. The private talks between Charles and Camilla remained strictly private. No one outside their small circle knew what they discussed regarding their future. Rumors among the staff were wild but unproven. Some thought Camilla was truly sorry and they were fixing things. Others felt a new distance and formality that hinted trust was gone forever. It became clear that this crisis was bigger than one couple's issues. It exposed deep questions about whether the monarchy could survive the 21st century as it was. The old model of surrendering autonomy was getting harder to keep. Yet the alternative, where royals act independently, threatened the unity that gave the crown power. The younger generation was watching closely. Prince William and Princess Catherine had built a version of royal life that included more privacy and control. But they stayed within the lines and coordinated with the palace. Camilla's actions raised questions about where those boundaries really stood. Public reaction remained an unknown factor. The crisis hadn't leaked in detail yet. There were vague rumors of tension, but nothing confirmed. The press team stayed ready to react if the story broke. They knew royal scandals often erupted suddenly and were hard to control once they started. International observers noted similarities to other recent crises. The Harry and Meghan saga showed that even loved royals could leave if they felt trapped. The Andrews scandal showed how fast a royal could be exiled when behavior became toxic. These examples suggested the monarchy's stability hid a lot of fragility. Experts began writing about the challenges facing hereditary rulers in democracies. They noted that the British model might need fundamental change to survive. The alternative was a slow decline until the monarchy was just a tourist attraction. For King Charles, the crisis forced a hard look at his reign. He had spent decades preparing his own vision of a modern monarchy. He had spoken about a streamlined family and environmental causes. But the reality of being king was more restrictive than he expected. His control over his own household was not absolute. His marriage, a core part of his identity, was now a vulnerability. The question of succession loomed in the background. William was the heir and seen as the best hope for the future. He and Catherine were popular in ways Charles never quite was. But William was learning lessons from how his father handled this. If Charles looked weak, it might encourage those who wanted big changes. If he seemed too rigid, it might suggest the institution couldn't adapt. As weeks turned to months, it was clear there would be no neat ending. The family would have to live with this and work around it. Camilla would stay queen consort, but with tighter supervision. Charles would stay married, but with a new view of the risks. The monarchy would continue because old institutions don't collapse overnight. But it would be changed in subtle ways. The urgent meeting hadn't solved the crisis because it wasn't really solvable. It was a symptom of the tension between tradition and modern life. These tensions would persist and appear in new forms. The crown would continue to sit heavy on those who wore it. It was the weight of an uncertain future. The crisis meeting revealed cracks in the monarchy that cannot be easily fixed. As King Charles and Queen Camilla navigate this trouble, the royal family's future hangs in the balance. What are your thoughts on Camilla's choices and the king's reaction? Should the monarchy change or stick to tradition? Share your views in the comments and subscribe for more updates on this story.